Super League is a game for finely tuned athletes at the top of their sport. The game has changed beyond recognition in the past 50 years. The professional era has seen major changes in the game, with the tempo of the game quicken up and skill levels increasing. This Heritage Lottery Fund project has thrown up a number of opinions on the evolution of the game. Some say it's changed for the better, others for worse. We set out to put some logic to the theories with the support of Tony Brown, referees coach for the RFL. Tony kindly watched the 1961 Challenge Cup final between Saints and Wigan and compared it to the modern era. He assessed the game as he would a modern day game and came to some interesting conclusions.
Okay, Tony, first of all, if you could introduce yourself to us.
Tony Brown, lived in St Helens all my life. Was a head teacher, now work for the Rugby Football League with the match officials, so obviously I can be a very unpopular man at times.
Tony, as part of the Heritage Project, one of the tasks that you can undertaken for is reviewing the 1961 Cup final as you would review a modern game.
Yes.
What are the striking differences that stood out, first of all?
Striking differences are visual. First of all, you notice a lack of sponsorship with the players, you notice the kits of the match officials, they're far from the athletes that the match officials are nowadays. Obviously it's a different game. There are a number of different law interpretations. I particularly play the balls a massive area. In the current game there's over 300 play the balls in a game, and I was interested in the speed of the play the ball on the Challenge Cup final, because some people's perceptions is that, you know, the game in 61 was possibly a better game than it is now, and in reality when you look at it, some of the play the balls are slower than the modern game, and I think the biggest difference I noticed was some of the rather different laws to the game, like the unlimited tackle. I was counting the tackles and we got to 8, 9, 10 and so on, which for our referees nowadays would be brilliant, because some of them struggle counting 6 on occasion. They were the major differences I noticed, really, just the different laws that applied.
The referee seems to play a slightly low-key role to sort of the modern referee as the game goes on.
Yeah, I think now I made a note of that actually. If you watch the Sky game tonight, for example, you'll hear the referee calling holes, goal, move, which reflects the microphone and so on, which we now have, whereas you don't hear the referee. You've only got one commentator on the game as well, so you only hear Eddie Waring. Eddie Waring talks far more about the game than probably some of the Sky commentators do at times, where the officials can become a big focus. I don't think it's a case of referees and touch judges have become more high profile. I think we've been made more high profile. It's a very good point actually. I think the game, the focus was far more on the game than at times it is in you know, at present.
You've looked at some of the timings of the play the ball. How do they differ?
I have, yeah. So I was quite interested. What we have now is we have statistics from the moment a player makes contact with a tackler to when the tackle is actually complete to when the ball's played. From the first contact to the play of the ball, roughly nowadays it's about 6 seconds, roughly, so that's the entire process. I noticed on some of these, even though there's no wrestling and holding players and so on as there is nowadays, some of the play of the balls were 8 and 9 seconds, and 3 seconds is quite a chunk of time really. I'd be intrigued if I watched the whole game just how many play the balls there were in the 61 final. In the current game you have well over 300 play the balls in a game. I suspect that you don't have that number in this game. Having said that, with unlimited tackles you're not going to get as many kicks downfield, you're not going to get as many scrums and so on as you have nowadays. So I keep saying it's a different game, but equally I still, as a St Helens person, I still thoroughly enjoyed the Vollenhoven try.
Looking back at it, obviously the guys are still reasonably fit, but working as well. Can you see a fatigue as the game sets in that might differ to the modern game?
I think what you notice is how, if you watch a Super League team come out nowadays, alright, some of them are short in stature and so on, but they're all very athletic looking. Whereas on here, I'm not saying they weren't athletic, but you can definitely tell who is a prop forward. Like, you can clearly identify Ab Terry, you can clearly identify somebody like Vince Cornelius, and then you see Brian McGinn and Vollenhoven and Ken Large. They're totally different physically to each other. Whereas nowadays, it's very difficult sometimes. Say, for example, we see a Solioli, you know, is he a forward, is he a back? Whereas in this game in 61, you could clearly differentiate who the forwards were and who the backs were. That was the main thing I noticed. Plus, being respectful to the 61 players as well. It was 13 on 13. You'd no substitutes, so that's a heck of an ask really. When you look at a forward nowadays, he'll be on for say 20 minutes, off for 10 minutes and so on. With 10 replacements again, it makes it a different game. The other thing I noticed was the yardage as well. Nowadays, you take the players back 10 metres. On this game, I suspected at times they worked back 2 or 3 metres. I'm not quite sure what the law was in 61, but they look very, very close to each other at times, to put it mildly. And some of the restarts were interesting. I mean, if the ball goes dead nowadays from a kick, it's either a 20-metre restart or a sticks drop out. Here we had, I presume it was a 5-metre scrum, although it was more a 2-metre scrum. I think the other interesting one is as well, when you look at the scrummaging on the 61 final, people sometimes hark back to, we want competitive scrums as it was in the old days. I was quite surprised just how messy the scrums were, with both hookers on the floor, forwards coming in not square onto each other and so on and so on. Aesthetically, our modern scrums look far tidier, but obviously they're not competitive at all. I think also we had, in the 61 final, I noticed a scrum going against the head, so that would be very rare in our game. Listening to Eddie Waring, he never even commented, it was totally accepted. Equally, there was another scrum where I think it was St Helens were putting the ball in and St Helens got penalised now. Very rarely would the team who've got the putting get penalised nowadays. So lots of different interpretations, different game basically.
A marked difference in the kicking game from open play and also, you know, conversions as well.
Yeah. Well, conversions interested me. I noticed a little thing straight away. The post pads were far less than the 61 final. Presumably the players were tougher in those days, whereas now we have massive post pads. I did query one thing, because on a conversion I saw all the players were under the posts. Well, nowadays all the players stand to the side, and I thought, oh, is there a rule on that nowadays? And in actual fact there isn't. It's just something that the players were asked to do a number of years ago, and it's accepted practice now that the players move away from the post. Whereas in the 61 final, as I say, you've got players all around the post. We talked earlier about the restart. That's an interesting one. If you miss the conversion, it was a kick from the halfway line, but it only had to cross the halfway line, so it didn't have to go 10 metres, and that led to sort of an interesting situation with a lot of players going for the ball. It's equivalent to our current one, where every now and again teams do a short kick-off when the clock's running down and the scores are close. So there's really a great deal of difference. Still enjoyed watching it though.
There seems to be a few tackles that do go a bit high but go unpunished, just mainly bad looks of things. There's no arguments just to keep the game flowing.
Yes, yeah. It's the referee seems far less intrusive on the 61 game than he probably is now, but equally the game is now far more technical, or it seems to be more technical. Now you can argue whether that's good or bad. I think there's, as a person who actually watched this game live, you know, I was still sort of a little bit in awe when I'm watching people like Dick Huddart and Vince Corellis and Alec Murphy and Tom van Vollenhoven. I think you make comparisons. I keep saying the game's different now, but I do think someone like Vollenhoven would still have adapted very well to the current game. That would be my view. I was particularly interested as a touch judge myself to see a touch judge running up and down with the blazer on. Well, running up and down is probably being very, very polite, really. I didn't see a lot of running from the match officials.
There, as we were talking before, again, there seems to be, rugby league is an honest sport, but a real honesty of the players, such as where, you know, playing the ball where they're tackled, and when any decisions go against them, getting back in the line.
Yeah, it's interesting. The play of the ball, I'd agree with you. They do actually seem to play it on the mark in the 61 final. they do probably play it with the foot as well. I know Kel Coslet at St Helens often has a go at me about players not playing it with the foot. It's his pet hate. But the other side of the coin is in the play of the ball was the rule whereby the marker player could actually kick for the ball. So on the one hand, you can argue our play of the balls can be untidy at present because people don't put the foot on the ball, people don't play it on the mark. But then when you look at the game in 61, you have players kicking out at the player playing the ball. So it ends up untidy, but in a different way. And yeah, I mean, the players in 61 were players with full-time jobs. They weren't full-time professionals. And repeating myself, I still viewed it as a spectacular occasion all these years later, watching the 61 final again.
There are some sort of high skill players watching it, myself through it, and there's little doubt there's quite a few players who could still hold their own. Obviously not at the age they are now, but in the modern game, players like Tom van Vollenhoven.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I can virtually remember the whole Saints team on this game. You know, a forward like Ab Terry, who was physically very, very big, but was also very, very mobile. A player like Vince Cornelius, who I remember as a child watching him train at Knowsley Road, and I was a bit amazed at the time that he actually ran from Widnes to training, trained at St Helens and then ran home again. I think I was probably one of the first people in St Helens to get Dick Huddett's autograph because he came along after the 58 tour to Knowsley Road with Vince Cornelius to a training session. I had no idea who he was, I just asked him for his autograph. And then years later I met him again, bit of posing here now, I met him in Sydney before a test match, which was quite special for me, you know, because alright, I work with the match officials, but deep down I'm obviously a St Helens supporter as well.